that case, welcome to Books and Brews Light, episode number 6. I finally went back and checked so I could know what I'm talking about. And today's guest is Pat Butler. She is the author, correct me if I say this wrong, of the book Collision, How an Accident Saved My Life.
How I found my life by accident.
That's right. That's right. I know it was more clever than what I was saying. So can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and about the book?
Sure. Well, I've been writing all my life. I was inspired by Dr. Seuss at a very young age with his very clever poetry and plays on words.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been writing all my life, mostly poetry, but more recently I've tried nonfiction narrative. And this was my first attempt, Collision, How I Found My Life by Accident. There's the cover. Oh, I guess that's not.
Yeah, it looks a little bit blurry. Can you hold it really close to the camera?
Screen thing on.
Yeah.
I forget about that. Anyway, I live in Florida now. I've lived overseas and I've been in many countries, so I've had kind of a vagabondy life. But I'm semi-settled in Florida, and I'm now in this season a full-time author up in the Northeast at the moment. And I love language, culture, traveling, exploring. I've got a very curious mind. So I just love digging in. Books are a much more complex project than poetry.
Yes.
Poetry is challenging enough. It's just a different part
It's
of
a very different kind of challenge.
Yeah.
I have about 600 pages of poetry I've written, and
so
I like to work in forms because I think it helps free form when you choose to do
agree. That. Yeah, I like that challenge. And for most of my life, I'm sort of semi-retired, but I've mostly worked with 2 different mission agencies that had as their core goal kind of bringing out various messages, or really soup to nuts. But the arena I was in was more focused on how do we get believers or even non-believers, how do we make faith real and concrete and livable?
So you're giving me the perfect opening to mention that if you write poetry and you're about faith, my publisher, Gabriel Horn, who sponsors this program, is actually putting out a book of poetry on faith right now. We're accepting submissions. So great opportunity. Right. But go on. So you're working on getting artists to...
Yeah, I work primarily with artists and creative people, artists of all stripes, not just painters, but all kinds of artists and creatives. And I just began to zero in at a certain point of how do we fix the brokenness. Fix is a stupid word really to use, but how do we get artists past some of the blockages and affirm their identity and help them just blossom in their creative gifts and not struggle so much. So I veered off a bit into more pastoral counseling, care counseling, soul care, spiritual friend, a lot of different categories and labels. And I found kind of a sweet spot there to try to use creative means too, to provide some creative or spiritual direction to the people.
Right.
Yeah.
And so before we get back to some of your life story, tell us about the book itself. It's narrative nonfiction. And in case anyone doesn't know, define what is narrative nonfiction, say, as opposed to just nonfiction.
Sure. Nonfiction books tend to be practical, helping kinds of books, like top 10 things you need to know about finance. They tend to be very practical. Narrative nonfiction would be more like in the memoir category, where you're telling a story that's true. It's not fictional. And then there's sort of everything in between. Those two are kind of the pole de genre.
How would it compare to creative nonfiction? Is it the same, different?
Yeah, there is a difference. I would say creative nonfiction is more in the style of the author. And it could be something, it's almost like poetry, but not quite. That's its own category.
There's so many categories.
Yeah, and they keep splitting and getting more and more microscopic. So
Right.
you might hear a little hesitation in me trying to define a genre, because by this afternoon later, it'll probably be different. But the
Right.
creative part too is using fictional elements to write a nonfiction narrative book.
Mhm.
And so my book is somewhere in between memoir and creative nonfiction, in that I'm telling a story, uh, but it's not my whole life.
Okay.
It's one defining event of my life.
Mhm.
And it isn't just about that. Like, here's my great story about how I was healed from spinal trauma injuries in a car crash.
Mhm.
But it's what happened after that, after you go home from the hospitals and the medical people and all that, or
Okay.
after a dramatic spiritual event. How do you go home and talk about that? And what
Mhm.
happens to your life when it changes radically? And you've got to find a way to talk about that in a way that people can understand. Otherwise, the eyes glaze over and
Right.
you
So
don't get
what
steps.
was the accident that led to the spinal injuries?
It was a car accident where I was rear-ended, high
Oh,
speed at high speed. The car kind of broke. The back seat broke off, snapped off, and I was flung backwards.
oh my.
My feet, my knees got caught on the steering wheel.
Mhm.
So I'm caught, and I felt, the ripping, all the ligaments and muscles tearing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whiplash. It had neck whiplash, but also three out. It was actually the whole spine that whiplashed. So I had three really problematic spots from that day going forward. And that launched me in a 12-year journey to find healing, and was told after 2 years I would not be healed. I should learn to accept the condition. I was sent to the psychiatrist to cope with now having a permanent disability. I was about
Mhm.
33, I think, when I got that message. And I just couldn't accept it. So in the emergency room, I was, you're in shock. You don't know exactly what happened. I was moving, but I didn't even know if I could move, or was I going to be paralyzed? What, like, I didn't know anything. And
Mhm.
I just started my prayers then. God
Yeah.
became, it was as short as heal me, help me, heal me, help me, just over and over while I was waiting in
I
the waiting room.
I was struck by one comment on your website where, or maybe it was on your Amazon page about the book, where you said to God, you've healed others, why not me?
Yeah.
And that really struck me, because I have someone in my life, and I like not to necessarily name people because maybe they
Mhm.
don't want to be named,
Yeah.
but who's had a lot of surgeries, orthopedic issues, just bad genetics, shoulder replacements, hip replacements, knee replacements, toe repair.
Oh boy.
He's been through so much pain.
Yeah.
And, I pray and pray and pray. Will you just miraculously heal this?
Right.
And it doesn't happen. So how did you finally answer,
Right.
why others and not me? What did you
Yeah.
conclude?
That is such a question, Laura. I mean, I hate to give a pat answer. There is no one answer to that
Probably
question,
not.
but it is a journey worth taking to get your answer. And it's not without struggle. I was, I say I prayed, but it was really more like a demand. I was like in the shock phase saying,
I hear
"You
you.
have to do something. You have got to do something. I cannot be permanently disabled at 33 years old." I
Mhm.
could not accept that. And I knew enough of the Bible to know God healed all the time. It's all through scripture. Why do
Right.
we not see more healing? What is it, a blockage? Is it something we're not getting? Or did God stop healing because he doesn't need to do that anymore? So the journey of that 12 years was seeking out, like, every passage in the Bible that spoke about healing, and trying to mine for gold. What's a
Mhm.
principle that I could start applying in my prayers and say, see, you said this here.
Yep.
So how about me? And and that was so rich. And it wasn't just about in fact, there was no answer for 12 years, but there were clues. I felt like I was following the breadcrumb trail, and God would just give me a piece, and I would say, huh, Okay, and I would work in that. And I'm going to talk, I'll just connect the forgiveness piece. That's kind of the second part of the conversation. One of the stories was the paralytic, that the four friends brought a paralytic friend to Jesus. The way they did it was they ripped the roof off a house. Bless you.
Excuse me. Sorry, I was really hoping I could hold that in, but it just
A
wasn't going
valiant
to
effort. A
happen.
valiant effort.
This might be a good time to say, what are you drinking? I'm drinking what obviously isn't working, Yoder's Good
Good
Health,
health.
mixed with the Celsius drink, because I don't really feel like drinking alcohol at 4 p.m. What
Well,
are you drinking?
I brought my pretty little blue drink here.
Oh, wow. What is that?
Isn't that fun? Someone gave me this bottle of, it's called Curacao.
Oh, yeah, we have that.
You know that? Well,
Yeah.
you put that in and you add a little whipped cream vodka,
Oh, wow.
and it will set you free.
If I felt like making a cocktail and going out and buying all the ingredients, I
Yeah.
would have had one called the train wreck for you today. It
Oh,
seemed rather appropriate.
you might have to send me
Given
that recipe.
given the title. I was going to, let me see. I can never remember how to share, but let me see if I can just for a second. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at all these pages. I have no idea what they're about. Give me 1 second. Here
Yeah,
we
go ahead.
go. The train wreck recipe.
Oh, how fun.
Ta-da! Yep, there it
Okay.
is. I'm so proud of myself for figuring out this technology.
I
So,
just
and again,
screenshot.
I
So
I'd
I got
spend
it.
hundreds of dollars a month on alcohol if I actually made all the ones that we could think up.
I know. I
Ice
know.
cubes, more or less free, vanilla vodka, orange liqueur, cream de
Yep.
cocoa. I'm sure that would taste very good. A splash of lemon lime soda and sweet and sour mix.
Wow.
So, right. And let me hit stop
Wow.
presenting. Again, I'm so proud of myself for figuring this out bit by bit. So,
Very good.
before I so rudely sneeze, because Yoder's Good Health is not giving me good health
That's
right
not
now.
helpful.
You were talking about the not about the train wreck, about forgiveness, about the
Yeah.
pieces of
Yeah.
getting to some understanding of why am I not being healed.
Yeah. And the forgiveness piece is going to be important later. I won't jump ahead too far, but
Okay.
that particular parable about a man who was paralyzed coming to Jesus to be healed. And Jesus starts with, your sins are forgiven.
Mhm.
And it just struck me, like, how could you say, like, we would never say that to someone, right?
Right.
You're paralyzed because you sin.
Mhm.
I don't know that I could get those words out of my mouth, but Jesus started with that. And
Mhm.
like, what? So hold that thought. That stuck with me, that somehow the paralysis was connected to forgiveness. Maybe, I'm just gathering clues.
Mhm.
So this clue search went on and on and on. I exhausted the medical system. I exhausted the alternative medical practice system. I was at my wit's end, and I felt like I had that moment where I had to ask the question, do you intend to heal me or not?
Mhm.
Not just demand to be healed, but maybe you don't intend me to be healed, because I see that in the scripture too, where not everyone was healed.
Mhm.
And that was the hardest one to ask, because I didn't want to know the answer. But with the ask, I felt this tremendous peace, like, stop everything you're doing, just let go of it all.
Mhm.
That was scary, but it was like, just leave this to me. And I just felt that, okay, I've been running around the world trying to find healing. Forget it. Just let it go. Let it go. But 10 more years had to go by before I met people who talked about, maybe just to keep it short, I'll talk about a doctor I met at a conference. And he said, there's 3 legs to healing. So think of a 3-legged stool. There's the physical component, emotional component, and the spiritual component. The physical is fairly easily corrected, or at least we can we start there as the easiest way to heal something. Okay, that once we get that accomplished, if we can, then we move to the emotional aspect. At that point, I had depression and chronic fibromyalgia and herniated discs and pinched nerves, all kinds of things. Deal with the depression. Okay. The third, the spiritual, and that's where forgiveness came in. So when I met him, I talked to him after that lecture and I said, can you pray for me for these herniated discs in my neck? The doctors wanted to fuse that, and I didn't want that surgery. And he said, did you forgive the person who hit you in the car accident?
Wow.
It took my breath away, frankly, because 12 years, no one had asked me that question. And I was in a spiritual community. I was talking to pastors and theologians about healing. No one ever asked me if I had forgiven anybody in the accident.
Right.
And I knew it was the key, but I didn't know how. I just knew it was the key. And
Have you held on to anger at this person all this time?
I didn't think so.
Okay.
He asked that question. I had to take a minute and I thought, and I said, I don't remember, but I think I kind of forgave him in the sense of oh, it's okay. It'll be all right. I didn't think I was going to have 12 years of pain. I
Right.
thought I was going to have a recuperation period, but he said, well, let's make sure. And so we prayed to forgive that man, that I would forgive that man. But I went back to my seat. I was like, wait a minute, there's more to this than that. Because I am pretty sure I forgave the man. I don't feel any animosity. But that was that night, went to bed. But I woke up the next morning, I had no pain in my neck for the first time in 12 years.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, we'll see. We'll see how today goes. Very cautious. And in that day, two things happened. One was I was in a small group and we had left. I was on my way to the dining hall and I had this overwhelming experience, which I don't know if it was a vision or a post-traumatic stress reaction or what. I'd never had the experience, but it was such an overpowering memory, like visual and sensory. And I just like grabbed the wall next to me to steady myself because it was knocking me off my feet. And it was a memory of the lawyers involved in the lawsuit case and how angry I was at them for things that were said and done. It was fury, rage. And the question floated in, what did you do with that anger? And I said, I didn't even know I had it. I didn't even know I had it. At the time, the way I dealt with it was, these are institutions handing down decisions. It's not like a person who offended me. I was furious at the decision. But I learned later, you need to forgive the messenger because they are the flesh and bones of the message.
And I think that's very human to need to direct our anger somewhere at someone instead of this vague, institution. Do you have reading? In fact, I know you have reading because we talked about it in email. Do you want to do your reading from your book?
Sure. Well, this is about the hero's journey. So it isn't about forgiveness piece.
Yeah, go ahead and finish that then.
But I can say, the outcome of that healing, because the second event was the next day. I had another vision, another forgiveness, and I went back to the doctor. And when he prayed that time, the complete healing came.
That's amazing.
And there were, I would say, 3 spirits attached to that, and one was anger and rage, grief and sadness.
Okay.
So that they were very palpable experiences, but we'll leave that for a moment. Maybe a year or 2 later, I read this book. I'll show you that book.
Okay.
People might want to pick this up, The Writer's Journey. I was taking a writing course and I discovered the hero's journey, which some of your listeners may know. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from that because this gave me the way to talk about my experience.
Okay.
Okay. So the hero's journey. To cultivate my writing skills, I signed up for an online course which used the writer's journey as its textbook. The book introduced me to the literary device known as the hero's journey, describing a typical adventure of the archetype known as the hero. As I read, my imagination ignited. The hero's journey accurately described the passage of a soul through life more vividly than anything I'd heard in church. Specifically, it illuminated my healing journey. As I worked with the material, I plotted the events surrounding my healing with the hero's journey structure. Random events now seemed connected and looked intentional, scripted with excellence by a master storyteller. I sat in awe of God's elegant design in leading me to healing. In hero's journey jargon, I had crossed thresholds and met allies, mentors, threshold guardians, and a dragon. I seized my reward in a cave of doubt and brought elixirs like forgiveness back to my community. I hadn't encountered anything like the hero's journey relating to spiritual life, connecting intellect and imagination, and I haven't stopped using it. A decade later, when asked to create a curriculum for artists, I pulled the writer's journey off the shelf and wrote for a year. For 10 more years, I taught it, and a half-baked manuscript waits in the wings for my attention. I wondered how to use the hero's journey in the arts. Christian jargon didn't fly in a secular humanistic culture. I was in France again now, least of all in the arts. Fresh language, a compelling narrative, archetypes. Could the hero's journey translate spiritual life to those who are more conversant in film than scripture? Convinced that the French would respond to demonstrations of God's power to heal, I also knew they loved a good story. While I incorporated the hero's journey into my writing and faith, I began framing spirituality to others in its language and metaphors. With the universal language of storytelling, I had a new vocabulary to satisfy the French mind and heart. People could readily relate to familiar films, scenes, and characters. Archetypes became examples to cite in conversations. A YouTube clip could speak volumes to the heart, imaginatively illustrating biblical principles. Building a theological framework took time. Explaining it through the hero's journey held everyone's attention. Viewing a movie and discussing it over coffee proved more amenable to spiritual insight than an invitation to a Bible study. I could bypass the keen French intellect and disdain for religion with stories from Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. I watched eyes light up with understanding. Story, as piercing and succinct as Jesus' parables, became an essential component of my work as a church planter and eventual pastoral care counselor. A Latin culture, France had passion as fierce as her intellect. We needed to engage both to reach the French heart, which would take imagination, revelation, demonstration, and story, film, and parable. As the fall approached, I asked God to increase my skill in ministry and writing through the hero's journey. He started with a stranger named Yvonne. And that's a little excerpt.
That's a great reading. I would say it's probably the same for Americans too. I'd say,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I've recently moved from one state to a very different part of the country. And so my experience in that state was that a lot of people probably did disdain religion, whereas I'm now in the South and there are Bibles everywhere. It's an entirely different culture.
Yes.
And I didn't really expect that. I'm in Tennessee, and I never really thought of Tennessee as being the South. I think of Alabama and Mississippi as being the South. So I
see.
Yeah. And your website is called The Mythic Monastery. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Explain that name. That's a very unique name for an author's site.
I know. Mythic is related to story. I like story. I like the structure idea to story has captivated me, that our lives seem so random and yet they're not. But how do we connect the dots? And so I like to use monastery. I'm drawn to that ancient future kind of fusion of faith. Like, don't chuck out the old and we don't chuck out the new. We need both and they complement. And then there's depth.
I love that. I think my second guest on this version of Books and Brews Light, was Ben Stimson, and his book is Medieval Folklore. And he and I had a great conversation about how those in medieval times knew a lot more than we give them credit
That's
for.
right. That's right. Yeah.
This is interesting. I meant to mention it to him, and we were so deep into this conversation, I kind of forgot. But about 2.5 months ago, I watched a video. I believe the channel is Catherine Sews or Catherine Sewing, something like that.
Mhm.
And she has a video on medieval hair care. And she was talking about how she could never really grow her hair past, maybe a little past the shoulders. She started using their methods, and her hair is now all the way down her back.
Wow.
And it's very interesting. So about 2 months ago, I started using some of these techniques. Now, it was a little bit of an uncomfortable transition because you're using clay of all things to wash your hair, which sounds horrible. But even in 2 months, I've noticed my hair is getting thicker. I don't know if it's longer yet, but my husband keeps saying he really sees the difference. And I thought, what in the world? What are we doing to our hair? That we
Wow.
can't grow our hair because it used to be normal. And she said it wasn't just that, it wasn't just the fashion, it was that they actually could grow their hair that long. And we can't today because of what shampoos and things are doing to our hair.
Isn't that something? Now I want to
Mhm.
try that.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
send you the link. It's either Catherine Sews or Catherine Sewing. It should be pretty easy to find.
Okay.
Plug that in medieval hair care and tell her I sent you. Um,
Isn't that
but
interesting? Yeah.
and it made me wonder too, okay, that's just hair. That's not that big a deal if you can't grow your hair to waist length, but what about all the other things?
Right.
And over, I'd say the last 5 years, I'm really learning a lot more about that. But so
Yeah.
yes, we need the old, we
Yeah.
need the new. And go on with what you were saying about that, monasteries.
Yeah, the monastery, like I was living in France, surrounded by monasteries. I'm Irish background, very monastic settings all over the place, and I love that architecture. I love the historicity of it all, the
Mm-hmm.
mythologies, the music, Irish in particular. That kind of Celtic soul that
Uh-huh.
it's hard to pin down, but the love of poetry and perception and the
Mm-hmm.
little people and that magical world they kind of live in so
Right.
easily. Um, I like the fusion of let's build a monastery around story and let's dig in. Don't just chew through books for entertainment alone, but
Mm-hmm.
some books you go back to over and over, right? And you go deeper into the depths of what the author is
Right.
saying. Uh,
Right.
I wanted
Define
both.
what that would mean to you to build a monastery around a story.
That's a good question. What would it mean to me to build a monastery around a story? Well, I
Yeah.
think it begins with the structure, the beauty, uh, the solidity, and the ability of it to be a refuge
Mhm.
and a place apart. Like I'm used to associating a monastery with a retreat center. So it's a place where you pull apart and you think and you create and you have beautiful gardens usually, at
Mhm.
least beautiful grounds, and you study and you're devoting a portion of your life to a way of life. You may obviously some enter monasteries for life, but I wasn't interested in that so much as entering the spirit of it and
Mhm.
carrying it around as I moved around and keeping that inner
Right.
monastery alive and well, that cell of my heart and the mind and the creation of beauty. And then spiritual disciplines. I added the spiritual disciplines from the past that I found very helpful at different points in my life and integrated them in. And that's the core of it. There's sort of a mindset, like a monkey kind of mindset that isn't for everyone, but for those
Mhm.
who are, I'm like, come over here and let's hang out and let's
Right.
I would say it draws more of an introvert, reflective personality. Um,
Right. I'm just trying to read my notes here. I'm
yeah,
I'm being vain. So this kind of goes to what you're talking about when you say mythic structure, or is that
Yeah,
something?
that's very similar. Yeah, mythic
Okay.
structure. I'm promoting right now, this period, I am promoting the idea of using the hero's journey as a structure for your spiritual life. And I compare it to a trellis for a vine, where a trellis and a vine growing is it's very intentional, it's very specific. There's care and cultivation of the vine. It needs certain elements to flourish, and it needs a trellis to climb. The vines need a trellis to climb, otherwise they don't. They're in the dirt. They
Right.
don't get the adequate sun and light. And so in your spiritual life, in the same way, you need a structure. So if you're on a journey, and like mine was with the healing, you don't
Mm.
know the answer to does God heal all the time, but you have a framework you can operate from. Well, just quickly, I'll run through a few of the stages. Ordinary world is the first stage. What is your status quo, your ordinary world? Well, mine was pain and misery and discontent and
Mhm.
depression and fibromyalgia. Um, then there's a call to adventure. Mine was the collision. Now I'm called to, well, I should back up. My ordinary world was fine until I had the collision. That
Right.
was the call to adventure, to discover, was God going to heal me in particular? And then there's a refusal of the call, where you deny that there's even a problem, which I was doing plenty of. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not going to get better. Then you have a mentor, and then you cross a threshold, which is where you really engage the process. And then you go on through approximately 12 stages. I think if you know you're in stage 3 of this journey, you don't have to figure the whole thing out. You just have
Mhm.
to get to stage 4.
Right.
So it breaks spiritual life down to, bites you can chew and swallow.
Mhm.
And like, don't worry about the big picture. Just go this far today, and tomorrow we'll look at that. And then the dots begin to connect. And by the time you're down the road, all you need is one good hero's journey to teach you how fluid this all is. It's not linear by any means, but you go through that, you see the structure. And this was, for me, the help of looking backwards through a healing journey that was finished. And now I could say, oh, yeah, I saw all these things. Now I can
Mhm.
tell my story. And through the repetition and through many, 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 many other heroes' journeys, I now know to tell myself, you're in stage 6, you're in stage
Yeah.
6. You just got to get to stage 7. And you
Right.
take yourself through the journey. But
Do you do you talk about all of this in your book, or is this going to be a
not,
separate book?
this is the half-baked manuscript I'm working on now.
Okay.
So
I'm excited to read it, so finish it up.
yes, it's a hero's journey in itself. But yes, I expect it probably will be finished and releasing maybe 6 to 8 months from now.
Okay.
Maybe that I want to be generous with the time because it's been going slowly. I'm in a caregiving situation, which
Mm.
that slowed my productivity down. But I will be leaving that probably another month, and then I'll be home again where I can be a monk and not see anybody and just focus in. And we're just coming into the editing stage. So
Okay. Okay.
I would think by 6 months we should wrap it up.
Okay. Now, you're currently working, I think currently with the Greater Europe Mission. Did I get that
Oh,
right?
well, I was until I retired from them a couple of years
Okay.
ago. And I continue to work as a volunteer with Inspiro Arts Alliance, which was the main agency that I was working with until
Okay.
I retired out of them as a full-time worker, but I stay connected as a volunteer because we're creating the online course of the hero's journey for spiritual life.
Okay.
So I'm staying
Okay.
with that project, and then keeping contact with the trainings. I probably trained about 100 artists in this, and trained the
Mhm.
staff then to carry it forward. And I'm supposed to produce the book, so I have to get going on my productivity.
Okay. And how does this connect working with artists on a spiritual journey, but
Mhm.
specifically artists, not just anyone? What is the intersection? Help me understand this.
Yeah, I needed something that would capture an artist's imagination. Artists are not, the usual folk that,
That's very true. Yeah.
I don't think I need to say any more about that.
Mhm.
And one of the things we encountered over and over, I struggle with it myself as a creative person, is the identity issue, and blocks to creativity.
Mhm.
And then in your faith walk, a lot of the artists felt like, could I do this when there are so many more pressing needs, or so it seems? Could
Mhm.
I justify producing art rather than doing a mercy ministry, such as feeding the poor or
Mhm.
healing? And so going into the ideas of your call to be an artist, your identity
Uh-huh.
as an artist, refusing the call to be an artist to do something you think is more spiritual. If
Mhm.
in fact God called you and wired you to be an artist, not so spiritual, because you're disobeying God then
Mhm.
you're not being who God intended you to be in order to be somebody you think you should be, to be a good
Mhm.
person. Those are the main issues.
This really, really speaks to me. And in fact, I talk about it in my own books. It speaks to me because I was raised very much, you go to college and you do something important. And I can guarantee you that the person telling me that, my dad, um,
Yes,
did not see music as important.
right,
I was supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, something, an officer in the military. But
wow,
music, that's,
right, right.
and he and I had a rather large fight over it when I was told you're going to college and you're paying for it and you're going to get the degree I tell you to. I said, no, if I'm
Mhm.
paying for it, I'm getting the degree I want.
Good for
And
you.
he was not happy, but I love that you said calling, because the reason I was so adamant that I would go into music was actually because when I was younger, I would not visually, audibly hear
Mhm.
music. And it didn't happen often, but it
Yeah.
was the most beautiful music you can imagine. And to this day, I feel like I need to compose.
Yes,
And
yes.
somehow that's the one thing I haven't done much of. Actually, I have composed
Oh,
music,
okay.
and I have a book of jigs and reels out, which is to me not
Oh,
spiritual
oh,
or
how
profound,
fun.
but it was fun.
Oh, I
And
love
I
it.
expect someday to compose more, but I felt I was very much told you belong in music.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what I needed to do. And I needed to write.
yeah.
And so in my books, two of the main characters are Amy, who's a professional musician, and Angus, who is a police officer and does search and rescue. And they do have a discussion about why music matters.
Mhm.
And she says, I'm not out there saving lives. And he says, but after I've lost someone on a search and rescue, I
Mhm.
come to music and you're saving my soul. And that was,
Amen.
speaking of journeys
Yeah,
as an artist, that was really something that I had
yeah.
come to, was accepting that there is
Yes,
a place for what we do. It isn't,
yes,
look at the grand art in the cathedrals and the
right.
art that art is going to pull you one way or the other. It's going to pull you toward good or toward evil. And
Mhm.
that's what's important. So I love what you're doing.
No, it's so common, and to embrace that call and and fully invest yourself into cultivating it, it's a huge turning point for artists. You'll
I'm
appreciate this as a musician, and
mhm.
I'm not sure I can cite the source. I wanna say it's from the book, The Bridge Over the River Kwai. That's just
Okay.
in my head, so maybe that's right.
Uh-huh.
But the story is of a group of people who were released from a concentration camp. So, you can imagine they are starved half to death, they're in rags, they're filthy, they're just a mess, but now they're getting out, and who's ever transporting them from one place to the next has them walking over toward the food tables, but there's a little ensemble of musicians on the side playing
Mhm.
classical music. They all stopped there, and they
That's
listened,
neat. Mhm.
and they felt rehumanized.
Mhm.
And they, as starved as they were, they stopped for the music, they didn't run for the bread.
And
There's
I love
no
that
secret of that.
story too. One of my favorite books in the world, I have a few favorite books in the world, but one of them is published by Gabriel Zorn, and it is called The Feet Say Run by Dan Blum. And it's centered on the character of Hans Jaeger from the time he's 13 in pre-war Germany up
Mm.
until he's about 85 and stranded on a desert island. It's
Wow.
a wonderful book. It's very profound and it's very funny at times too. But Hans Jaeger's father owned a music production factory. And so after the war, he's trying to support his girlfriend and her son, who I don't remember where the son came from, but he's trying to support them by repairing instruments. And he's talking a lot about the horrible, horrible conditions for Germans post-war.
Yeah.
And he is so excited when finally somebody brings an oboe to be repaired. And then they finally go to a symphony, and he makes the comment, we knew that civilization was coming back when music came back.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to the story you
Yeah.
just did
Yeah.
about how important it is.
Yeah.
So,
I've got so many stories I could tell about that, the healing power of the arts,
mhm,
especially
right.
trauma victims and art therapy. I mean, I just
Music
love
therapy, right.
it's transformative for people, and their heroes' journeys can land very nicely if they're accompanied by the artists.
Mhm.
So,
Which reminds me, my dog is 10 and a half years old. She's an Irish Wolfhound, and they usually only live 6 to 8 years on average. So for her to be 10 and a half and she's still running, but
oh,
she also has her mornings are usually pretty difficult. So I should go play harp for her
oh,
again.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So anything else you want to say about your book? Oh, I did want to ask you, you had talked somewhere on your website about meeting demons, meeting the demonic as a missionary.
Yes,
I'm dying
yes,
to hear that story.
yes. That's a huge one. I really need to write a book about that alone. The um, I'm a perceptual person, so I had some early experiences with. I wouldn't have had this language, but in retrospect, there was a spirit, there was a presence that was malignant, and I
Mhm,
recoiled from it. So I had several of those experiences, and then on the other side, I had some experiences where I felt another benevolent presence that was
mhm,
blocking evil and just kind of protecting me.
mhm,
And I had like a childlike faith, but I didn't really have an informed faith till I was about 20, 21. And then, I kind of knew there's demons out there, maybe, but maybe not. Like this is America, where
mhm.
as long as you're in church, you're good, kind of thing. And
Right.
then more and more, it was becoming more obvious to me that no, there's some active things going on that are not explainable in human terms. When I got to the healing part of my story, I didn't connect healing and deliverance. I didn't
Mhm,
connect physical ailments to demonic causes. And that's what the doctor that prayed for me did. He's that three-legged stool thing. He
mhm,
was talking about the demonic taking taking advantage of a physical ailment, perhaps even causing it. If we look at the book of Job, we see a story of Satan asking God if he can attack Satan with physical affliction. Job was
mhm,
blameless. So I always tell that to people. You could be perfect. You could be absolutely blameless because Job was, and yet Satan got permission to attack him. And we don't really know the bigger is like why did God allow that even? We don't really know, but we what we learn from that is how to suffer and to badger God for healing,
mhm,
which I that's what I did. And there's no mention of demons in his story, but there is Satan. In the Gospels, there's stories of demons coming out of people and they were healed. Now,
mhm,
I wasn't connecting this in my own situation, but when the doctor said the forgiveness piece, and when I had that vision in the hallway where God was asking me the question, "What did you do with your anger?" I immediately had a verse run through my mind, "Do not let the sun go down in your anger. Do not give the enemy a foothold."
mhm,
And I understood that anger had given a foothold for the enemy to come in, riding on the heels of the trauma to just sneak in and hide behind the injuries and just make it worse and make it permanent.
mhm.
I should have normally healed up from those injuries, but I wasn't. And that's what people were saying is permanent. And I knew there was more to the story. And so when in that dramatic healing episode, which I describe in Collision, those spirits of that became manifest to me as there's actually, I feel like a spirit of rage coming out of my spine now.
Wow.
Like my spine exploded kind of. There was no pain,
Mhm.
no, nothing physical, but this perception, something's leaving my spine and my spine's going like a tornado. I actually
Mhm.
called the doctor who was praying for me because I felt like I'm going to tip over here. And,
Right.
and it left. And then I just laid on the ground and I felt like I had just drank 20 cups of high test coffee, the electricity going through me. And again, hearing verses in my head that I knew where God is saying, you're free of that now. You're free.
Right. I've heard some amazing stories of physical healing and the sensations that people have
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
I went years ago to Medjugorje and I was praying for a very major thing that the answer ended up being no. And I still have a hard time with that sometimes.
Mhm.
However, it was very interesting. I was marching up the mountain with a man who was, I don't know, maybe 60, 65. And he said to me, I don't believe in miracles, even though I'm experiencing one right now. And he went on to tell me that at home, he couldn't climb a ladder to change the light bulb. And his sisters who were on the trip with him later told me, oh, it's way worse than that. He can barely get out of bed. And
Wow.
he said, as we started, and so he wasn't going to come on the trip. He's like, I can barely get out of bed. Why am I going to fly halfway across the world? I can't
Yeah.
do it. But
Yeah.
they persuaded him to. And he said, as we flew into the air over, I keep forgetting if Medjugorje is Bosnia or Croatia. But he said, as we flew into the air over Medjugorje or around Medjugorje, he started to feel better. And the closer we got on the bus, the better he felt. And here's a man who
That's,
could barely get out of bed,
yeah.
marching up the mountain for the second time that day. And he was striding along beside me like he was 18 years old and a football player or something.
Wow.
And it was very interesting. And in fact, I had already climbed mountains, hiked mountains, I should say, in
Mhm.
Scotland. And I know how much your thighs hurt when you do that and you're not used to. I
Right.
was going up and down those mountains all week long. I never felt a thing. And so I've had a few things in my life like this, and I call them meaningless miracles. Like, it's a miracle. This is physically
Right.
impossible,
Right.
not feel pain.
Right.
But what's the meaning of it? And maybe it's just
Yeah.
saying, I really am here, even though I'm not going to answer the prayer you came for the way you want me to.
Right. Right.
Maybe that's what it is. And that's
Right.
important too.
I would,
So,
and
yeah, go
I
ahead.
would even connect it to the simple, ordinary things in life because miracle's a big word, and people have a mindset about what a miracle looks like. But I've had these little baby things that they're miracles to me. I woke up with a sore
Uh-huh.
throat one day, and at
Mhm.
that point, I knew to say, "Lord, what's this all about?" And He said, "Remember all that tea you've been drinking lately?"
Mhm.
And I told you to calm down with that
Oh,
because
oh no.
what happens with I was drinking a lot of herbal tea at the time, and it irritated my throat,
Hmm.
and yet I persisted in it. And and then one day I wake up with a sore throat, and He said, "Why don't you just respect your body?"
Hmm.
Back on the tea. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was ignoring you. You were trying to warn me, and I was ignoring you. So sorry." So I went in and I gargled salt with, my grandmother's old recipe of if you have
Hmm.
a sore throat, gargle with warm salt water. Went in there, dumped the tea, got the hot salt water, gargled, and I was fine. And,
That's
I
great.
normally would have just gone to the medicine cabinet, got some pills, some cold medication, maybe had a sore throat or a cold for a few days or a week. We're here, 2 minutes, we were done, and it was free, no meds, no nothing,
I'm
salt.
I'm going to have to try that. I've been battling I don't know what it is, just a mild sore throat for
Uh,
3 weeks now, and
yeah,
it just doesn't want to let go. And maybe it's allergies. I don't know, but I had
yeah.
forgotten about salt water. I'll have to try that.
Well, I really say ask God first. I'm trying to develop that habit. I don't have it right all the time by any means, but developing the habit of asking God first before you do anything because he might say salt water, but he might say something else. And he might say, go to the doctor even.
Mm-hmm.
Or
That's good advice.
it's just like what I just want to develop that instinct of asking God first. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's so powerful. I've seen counterfeits of healing, but I think invoking the name of Jesus does something that nothing else does. Nothing, I've never seen anything do what that name can do. And why wouldn't I go to him first instead of trying to figure it out on my own? He certainly wants us to use common sense in our brains, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to consult with him and say, okay, I want to think about this with you.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, I'll say that's sort of a personal account of my hero's journey, and then I switch over to, at the end, I give some tips on the lifestyle I've tried to develop about healing. And then I wanted to share this with your listeners too. I made this little kind of, the blur. Sorry about the blur. But I made up a little PDF booklet on the steps. I broke down forgiveness to a process of about 7 steps that I have to go through to really get a complete forgiveness and reconciliation going.
Send me an image and I'll make sure it gets on the video.
Okay. I'll do
And send in, because I think you've tried to show, is it 3 books?
You mean what kind of books?
That were blurred that you held up that.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'll put them aside and get you pictures of that.
Right. And I'll put those up.
They're resources, and I'm trying to build in the Mythic Monastery. Also, I think monasteries were places of healing. They were always, collecting or concocting those elixirs, right? And what about collecting a source of resources for people who are on a healing journey? And did you try this? And do you look at that? And are you stuck in grief? There are spirits associated with trauma, and I had to deal with that. That was very specific kind of subcategory of the overarching healing. So yeah, it's a hero's journey. And I wanted to give my personal story first and then go to the one I'm writing now, which I think is going to be titled Embark, of the nuts and bolts for someone else in their hero's journey.
I'm sorry, what will the title be?
I think it's going to be called Embark.
Embark. Okay.
Something like that.
That's the word I missed.
I have to tweak the title yet.
I've got a book like that. I'm still tweaking the title. It was going to be called Cooking with Rabbit, but everybody thought I meant that you'd be cooking with your rabbit in his little chef's hat and apron. Well, no, that's not what it means. So where can readers find you online?
The best place right now is the Mythic Monastery, mythicmonastery.org. Another is Instagram, which is at mythic_monastery. And those are the 2 I use primarily. I will say the website is going through a migration now, so it's a little messy, but life is messy. So I think
right.
Hopefully we'll be over in a month or so. Yeah.
Messy is the nicest word for it. Readers can find me at booksandbrews.net, laurabosica.com, and probably several other places, including gabrielshornpress.com and glenmurrelfarms.wordpress.com, where you can see pictures of our sheep and our dogs and our chickens and our rabbits. We have New Zealand white rabbits. I keep thinking of them coming out of a magician's hat, but they're actually far too big for magicians to use. So, which is neither here nor there. So do you have any public events coming up that readers could possibly attend?
I don't. Because I'm living between 2 worlds right now, I'm hesitant to plan them because I have a lot of unknowns in a caregiving situation that I was about to book one and I said, I just can't guarantee I'll be in that state on that day. So I'm holding off for now, but I will be doing Zoom things and hope to start some events next year.
Will those all be on your site when you get
I'll post events and sites, book signings, and looking for platform. I lost a lot of my platform in the pandemic, and then retirement takes away another broad one. But I want to think carefully about what audience to bring this to, because it's fairly niche, healing for artists. And I want to, that's my passion, to reach that niche. And I don't want to spread myself thin, although the material's for anybody. I have spread them
Right.
to general audiences, but I don't want to forget the artists. That's
Right. And
that-
I think it is a very important intersection, as per the story I told. And my upcoming events, I think I finally remember it, the Southern Festival of Books in Nashville on October 26th and 27th. Beyond that, I don't have anything planned. And so, any last words you'd like to say to our readers,
yeah, I would
our
say,
listeners?
yeah, to the listeners, I like to write for the heroes without capes. That's my category that I'm using. Hero in literary terms means just someone who's the main character in their story.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you have to be courageous and noble and God-fearing and all that, but you're the main character in your story, and you're intended to live a very great story.
Yep.
I think the hero's journey can help you find the way through what looks like maybe very baffling events. So I'd like to interact with you. Please contact me through my website, and let's see if we can straighten out some plot twists or some of those characters you'd rather kill off in your
I love that. Years ago, I heard a saying, be the author of your own story.
Yeah,
And think about the story that you want to be told about you. And that was highly motivating to me, to not be a victim of any of the things going on
right,
around me.
right.
And when I reached a low point, someone gave those words back to me, and it was very helpful. So
Good.
great advice. Cheers. Thank you for being
Cheers.
on the program.
I didn't
I
want to
love
drink
that
until
blue
we were
Curacao.
finished. So
Right. Okay. I don't have much to clink with. Apple cider vinegar.
you're
It's all
good.
I've got.
You're great.
Cheers.
Okay.